Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about how to develop a more effortless vibrato and also talk about how different components of the body, such as in your hand and your arm, will control different aspects of the vibrato, different things in the vibrato that you hear. So part of vibrato is the speed, part of vibrato is the amplitude, and part of vibrato is how much you want to hear the pitch or not. So I'll just explain kind of how to develop more control over those different aspects of vibrato. So I find the most important mechanism for having control over your vibrato is in this last finger joint. And the first mechanism I think it's important to be able to do is just release your hand on any object and then do little pull-ups with your fingers. So your fingers are pretty much released, you're just hanging, and then you pull them up a little bit. And if you want, you can do this on another object where you're just hanging and then you do these little pull-ups. So this is the mechanism of that last finger joint in vibrato. And if you want, you can start doing a few at a time. Of course, just to show you, I'm using the wrong hand, but it'll be the same. Now that's using quite a bit of force because my arm's hanging, but when you're actually doing vibrato, it'll be much less force. A good place to start is going to fourth position on any string, and then just drop all your fingers in a comfortable position, and then see if your hand can be not a little bit more towards flat fingers and completely relaxed. Find a position like this, and it doesn't matter what strings your fingers are falling on. Just find a position to allow your fingers to be completely relaxed. And then from there, we can do that same mechanism where we pull up the fingers a little bit and then release them back. So in this backwards position, really make sure there's nothing engaged in this area. I'm holding the violin, so there's some engagement here, and there's no other engagement. So then you pull the fingers up and then release back down. So really, there's not even any engagement in my forearm or my wrist or anything. I'm just lifting the violin up here with the bicep. So this is the first step, that just this finger engages on the way up. And then you can start to do 2 at a time, 3 at a time, or more. And so this is that mechanism of the finger. Now I want you to try kind of that same mechanism we were doing, where the finger, pick a finger, say the middle finger, and notice how the hand will start to move a little bit with it if you just do that same downward mechanism. And also, I forgot to mention, as we pull up, it might be obvious, but when we pull up the finger, pressure goes down into the string. So it's little finger pull-ups, and the string will get pressed down a little bit. And then the fingers are just resting lightly as you release back. Then you can go back to this, and just like you were doing, try to do that same mechanism. Now put your thumb against one of your fingers and do it against your thumb. You'll notice that the hand will just start swinging back and forth, and the wrist will become kind of a point from which the hand can swing as a pendulum. So now you can start to feel how the wrist can be involved with the vibrato. But that first motion, I think, comes from the finger, to have a very effortless swing like this. And if you're having trouble to do what I'm doing and just going back and forth, you can try just once at a time, then two at a time, then three at a time. And what's the most important is that after you do that engagement, the hand and wrist completely relax, so that it's always just a point of force, just an instant, and then back to release. So most of the time you're completely relaxed. You're just having these little impulses that's kind of driving that pendulum to move back and forth. And once it is here, you can also feel, you can try feeling backwards with the wrist, moving the hand that way and then releasing. Some people find this is easier to feel, and you can do two of them and then a few of them. And what's happening when you're doing vibrato, your finger is controlling that frequency, the rate at which the vibrato is moving. So let's say we're playing this note. The frequency of the vibrato is controlled by my finger. Then we can start to allow this joint and the wrist joint to become involved in that motion, just like what happened down here. And what you'll notice is this joint and the wrist joint will work together to create the amplitude of the vibrato. So let's say you start out with just the finger, and for now, just to show you, I'm going to tense up this joint and this joint, just so you see how the vibrato will sound if it's really just the finger moving. So that's when you get a very thin vibrato that's not that appealing, but there is a pitch, which is good. And maybe sometimes you want that vibrato. Now I'm going to allow this joint to start moving and this joint to start moving with that motion. And you can tell how the amplitude starts to become wider. Next, you can even add a little bit of this motion where you feel this joint moving that direction and then back to neutral. So hand completely neutral, relaxed. We can feel the finger to pull up this way from neutral. Then we can feel this joint moving back from neutral. And the wrist, if the wrist is tight, this joint won't move. If this joint won't move, the wrist won't be able to really move. Really, all these joints have to be relaxed and able to function well. So then you can move back from neutral. This joint will be going back, the wrist going back. And then as you're doing the vibrato, you can start with just a rhythm, like ya. You can do it with, feel a pulse, and then go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which is controlled completely by the finger. Then you can start to increase the amplitude of that by using this joint. Maybe this is a bit slow to have a nice vibrato here. We can be a little faster. And then just with this combination, you can use your ear to find the vibrato you want. So what I would recommend is you're hearing the pitch as a rhythm, and that pitch is controlled by that finger mechanism. And then you allow these joints to work for you to create that amplitude you want. And what you'll notice is when I'm doing this vibrato, oftentimes when I start out, it's very narrow because it's starting out with the finger, and then the other joints start to become involved. And the nice thing about this vibrato, when you do have the mechanism from the finger, is the vibrato can start to be quite wide and slow, and you'll still hear a pitch. Also, I find a lot of students, including myself, will start to use the arm a lot for vibrato. And what I've found is that often if your arm has to get tense to do the vibrato, like let's say really engage the bicep and swing, I used to do that all the time, it'll actually be harder to have a nice bow arm because the arms like to do the same thing. So I find that even if you can have a very nice vibrato without this finger mechanism working well, if you can get this working well, you'll use your arm a lot less. You'll have less energy from the arm, and that'll in turn will help your bow arm. At least that's what I find with myself and my students. So again, fourth position I like starting with because it's a position where you can just hug the violin, this area, you can touch it here. And what that does is it makes it so you can't use your arm. So then you can work on the finger mechanism more easily. Third position, I feel it's just a little bit uncomfortable for me. Some people say practice this in third position, but I find fourth position to work better for myself. And the nice thing too about this vibrato is it doesn't take holding the instrument anywhere to work. So if I go up here, I don't even have to touch my shoulder. I don't even have to touch my head to the instrument. But of course, the mechanism will make the violin move a little bit if you don't even have your head or shoulder against it. So I do recommend having your head into the instrument a little bit so it doesn't move. So maybe you don't always want to have a vibrato that has this pitch very clear. And the reason for that is the finger's always releasing. Every time the dip in the vibrato happens, that finger is kind of creating a harmonic. And that's what gives it a very clear pitch. Maybe you don't want that. And that's when you'd actually keep the pressure into the string throughout the vibrato. So you hear you get a little bit more of a wobble sound. So if that's what you want, you can do that. And then if you want to start also, the position of your finger can affect this quite a bit, because if my hand is in this position, I release back to about here, and that's going to make kind of a thinner, quicker vibrato. Which is great if I want that kind of sweet, thin vibrato. If you want more expressive, slower vibrato, then just reposition your hand a little bit so that your fingers are a little flatter for their neutral, relaxed position. And then your fingers have to pull up a little more, and there's going to be more amplitude. So, just to give a summary, use your finger, these finger pull-ups, to control the rate of your vibrato. You can practice in rhythms if that helps. Use this joint and your wrist joint to control that amplitude of the vibrato, how wide you want the vibrato to be. And then if you want a pitch or not, that is controlled by how much you really release the finger on the way back, so that there's no more pressure into the string every time you release it. And finally, if you haven't done vibrato before, be very patient. Always start out, I would say, with that finger mechanism working. It'll sound really thin. And then, just like a swing that's a pendulum, you give it just a little bit of force, and the pendulum quite quickly becomes much wider. So this is the way to find a more relaxed vibrato. You just start, if you think about, if you're in a swing, you're just moving your legs a little bit back and forth, and that's eventually making you swing this wide. And then imagine how hard would you have to push someone in a swing to make them go from just stationary all the way up here? It'd be an enormous amount of force. So with vibrato, it really doesn't need much force at all to become wide. It starts out small, and then it gradually becomes wider. And so definitely be patient. Don't worry if it's a very thin, small vibrato at first, and see if you can just allow those joints to start moving together, and gradually the vibrato will become really wider and very beautiful. So I've been playing violin for 21 years. I learned this type of vibrato within the last year and a half. So it definitely can be learned by anyone, I think. I always could never learn how to do any vibrato like this. I always use my whole arm. But yeah, if your vibrato is in your way, it's creating a lot of tension, I think these exercises of approaching vibrato very slowly, and starting with the finger can help a lot. So thank you for watching. I hope this helps.